I gave a lot of thought to how I could entertain and hopefully say something of value to all of you tonight. I'm pretty sure that everybody in this room knows more about water than I do. You've spent your careers in the water business, and I haven't. A lot of you are engineers, and I'm not. So the things I want to share, I would invite you to actually get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. Find some people, maybe you're an engineer or you know some, and maybe replicate it. I think the figures that I've come up with are in the ballpark. I think they're a really good place to start. But, thank you. It was resonating in a distracting manner. I think that it's information that people need to have. It's information that policymakers will understand. And it's information that's based on the state and not a region or a city or a county or a water district, but the whole state. And it's something that has relevance for the region, the whole Southwest. California can solve the water scarcity problem in the Southwest, and no other state can because they don't have atmospheric rivers hitting the Sierra Mountains, dumping 100 or 200 million acre feet, even in a dry year, over 100 million acre feet. They don't have an ocean where you can desalinate water. So Nevada and New Mexico and Arizona, the upper basin states of the Colorado River, they don't have the options that we have. So we have a responsibility as a state to create water abundance and solve the problem of water scarcity. I'm going to skip through all the slides that have writing on them. Thank you. I had a crisis this morning. I thought to myself, you've got like 28 slides and half of them have writing. Skip them. Here's one that I was advised not to talk about energy, and so I deleted several energy-related slides, but I didn't delete this because it's illustrative of a lot of things. Our state government is nuts. They think they're... Can I tell you why? Well, there's so many reasons. I could talk all night. The state government wants to put floating windmills out in the 20 miles offshore in San Luis Obispo County and Humboldt County, and they've just leased 500 plus square miles of ocean to do this. And they're going to put 10 megawatt floating wind turbines out there. I have a graphic of it I can show you at the end because it's one of the last slides if you're interested. But these things are 3 times the height of the Statue of Liberty from the water line to the tip of the torch. They're over 1,000 feet tall. The 10 megawatt wind turbine, which even in offshore wind, it only generates about 40% of that 10 megawatts. So you get 4 megawatts. So to get California electrified, to make a long story short, you'd need 25,000 of them. And they would be anchored in water 4,000 feet deep with cables, and they'd be floating, and they'd be 1,000 feet tall. Well, what could go wrong? And how much would it cost? Where would we get the ports and the ships and the submarines and the divers? And how would we build housing with the California Coastal Commission active to actually help workers service these wind turbines? So with all of that in mind, if you converted California to electric, which they're bound and determined to do, you would need to increase the footprint of wind and solar by 20 times what it is today. So just put that in your head. I actually don't, solar, you'd only need 2,000 square miles. I know that's a lot, but California is a big state. So I guess if I was going to pick between solar and wind, you're going to pick your poison, solar's better. But here's where I wanted to go with that as well. Look at the little rectangle, the vertical rectangle on the left. That's the amount of water that we use for energy that actually is used to treat water and transport water. Wastewater treatment and pretreatment and groundwater pumping and the aqueduct pumps. It's pretty well documented. The Public Utility Commission's most recent analysis says that 20% of all energy in California is used for water, but only 12% of that 20% is used for water conveyance, pumping, and treatment. I find that extremely encouraging, because it means if we want to produce more water in this state, we're not going to break the bank with energy. Oops. Well, wait a minute. I think you can see that one. Energy to create new water. Now, this is where I want the engineers to really get fired up. I'm an accountant, and I'm a journalist. And I've talked with a lot of engineers, but every site's different. Every project has a different energy consumption profile. But these are pretty good ballpark numbers. So you think about gigawatt years, that's just another way of saying if you had a project that was operating all year round, constant input of electricity, this is what you would need to process 1 million acre feet a year. 200 megawatts, 0.2 gigawatts. Remember in the previous slide, if we want to electrify California, we have to get to 100 gigawatts. So look at this. You're talking about a minute fraction of the amount of electricity that we're trying to achieve in California in order to get another 1 million acre feet of water from various sources that we haven't developed or haven't finished developing yet. You guys you're all familiar with this one, so I'm going to be real quick with this one. I mean, the main point here is urban water and interior water in particular is a minute fraction as well of the total amount of water we divert. I want to go fast through these so that we can have, whoops, those are words. This is what I really came here to try to talk about. These are project categories. When I worked on what we failed to qualify for the ballot in 2022, the Water Infrastructure Funding Act, we had eligible categories of water projects, and these are some of them. These are the big ones. And this is a hypothetical assortment of projects that could get us 5 million acre feet of new water that's not currently diverted or treated. And the first three I would kind of consider together because we don't want to double count. But there's definitely 3 million acre feet on the table. I'll show you some data to demonstrate that in a subsequent slide. But if we were able to divert from the delta storm runoff in wet years, and we put that water in off-stream reservoirs, and remember, the aquifer recharge reservoirs doesn't have to come from the delta. It can come from other sources of water that are running off in the watersheds throughout the state. That's 3 million acre feet. Treating urban wastewater, there's at least another 1 million acre feet on the table. There's 400,000 acre feet just in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's probably easily another 600,000 in the coastal cities. We're talking about coastal wastewater because the wastewater that's treated in the interior cities does get reused. It gets put back in the rivers and the farmers use it, or it works its way downstream. It gets treated again. But the water that goes into the ocean, there's another 1 million acre feet easily. Now the next two are in one case problematic, well, in both cases, and in the other case controversial. Desalination is a hot issue. People go apoplectic. Desalination, right after the Delta Tunnel, is desalination in terms of stimulating apoplexy. It's true, But I think, again, you balance between the two. Maybe we can't, you are not going to build 10 more Carlsbad power desalination plants, but maybe we can get more than 500,000 acre feet of urban wastewater, urban runoff. So there it is. And look at this. This is one of the things I really wanted to share with you. There's a group in the San Joaquin Valley, the San Joaquin Valley Blueprint. It's farmers and water agencies that have come together to design and engineer a new way to get water out of the Delta. And they're, just like everybody, terrified of saying anything positive or negative about the tunnels. So they represent this as supplemental to the tunnels. But what they got in mind is something that could divert this 200-acre site, they claim, could withdraw 15,000 acre feet a day from the Delta. They have infiltration beds where they put giant French drains, giant perforated pipes. The perforations are large enough that they believe the silt will go into the collection channels, which you see in the center there. They're open on both ends. This is a delta island. So they would take a couple of sites on existing delta islands. They would cut a couple of holes in the levees. They'd have a channel. The water would just settle into these perforated pipes. They have a pilot project that they're already operating. So they're very serious about this. And I'd be happy to connect you with any of them, and no, they didn't pay me to come out here and say that. Well, look here. This is what we're talking about. This is from the Public Policy Research Institute, pretty reputable source. This is from 1980 through 2016. This is the average so-called uncaptured water from the Delta. Now, every time they talk about uncaptured water, the number shrinks because the amount of water that's deemed required for ecosystems expands. But this study, which came out in 2017, reported that the average uncaptured water in the Delta is 11 million acre-feet a year on average. Now look here, you had all this rain in the 80s, you had another big round of rain in the 90s. It was pretty dry, a couple of wet years. That stops at 2016. We know that 2017 was an extraordinary year, and of course this year was even more extraordinary. We monitor the amount of water flowing out of the Delta, and it's been well over 25 million acre-feet this year through like 3 days ago. So there's a lot of water that could be withdrawn from the Delta safely if we can figure out a way to do it. That's some of the sites that they are considering. You can kind of see where they got a central Delta and southern Delta. There's one in the north, but I cropped it. Had to make room. Yeah, we can talk about this one. These are numbers. Look at that. 5 reservoirs. You think any of them will get built? They're still on the table, sort of. Vaquero is going to get finished. They're expanding Vaquero. That's going to be an off-stream reservoir to help with water supply in the East Bay, the San Francisco Bay. Sites, maybe. Sites was supposed to be 2 million acre-feet. It was supposed to be a twin to San Luis. It was supposed to have pump storage, which is a tremendous asset, especially if you're serious about renewable energy. The San Luis Reservoir, up until 5 p.m. every day, they pump water up the hill from the forebay, the O'Neill forebay, into the reservoir. And then every day at about 6 p.m., all summer long, they let the water down back into the O'Neill forebay, and it generates 450 megawatts. That's a lot of power. And they can do the same thing with sites, but they didn't. They compromised on the capacity, and they compromised on the output. They said, in order to get less opposition from environmentalists, they said, we'll give half of the yield from sites to ecosystems. Even though it's hot water, it won't even help the salmon. And so it's not really very economical. So we'll see if sites ever actually gets built. Pacheco's desperately needed in the Santa Clara Valley. Probably never going to get built. Temperance Flat was killed even though voters approved it in 2014. And Temperance Flat would not only be a great pump storage asset because they wanted to build at 500 feet of elevation above the Millerton Reservoir. It's already a dammed river. It would be upstream from Millerton. They could get hydroelectric power. It would have been full. Del Puerto Grande is a minute compromise to a twin to San Luis that was planned for south of the Delta. Never got built. The proposal died. Raising the Shasta Dam, if you want to cool water in the Sacramento River, raise the Shasta Dam. It's the deepest reservoir in the state, and water has to be under 70 degrees for salmon to thrive. And you can't do that with water from the Sites Reservoir, but you could do it if you raise the Shasta Dam. All of the engineering plans are done. The federal government makes half-hearted attempts to raise the Shasta Dam from time to time for the last several decades. May never happen. And it as well could have been filled up this year. There's a lot of controversy over the yield. One of the ways that the opponents try to dismiss the possibility of raising the Shasta Dam is they say, well, we're never going to need it because it's never going to fill up that high. And that's a very difficult contention to disagree with. But we obviously saw this year that it would have. And the question is, if you're going to have climate change and you're going to have erratic weather, that erratic weather will include really high precipitation years. So you want to have more storage capacity. Talked about Temperance Flat. And that, I think the yield was underestimated there too. And it's south of the Delta. So, you bypass the whole tunnel controversy. It would be a tremendous asset to have Temperance Flat. This is something that I also really looked forward to sharing with you tonight, because the state of California estimates there's 850 million acre feet of unused aquifer capacity in the state of California. The lowest number I've ever seen for the San Joaquin Valley is 50 million acre feet of unused aquifer storage capacity. That's so much capacity. And the other thing that they're just learning with ground penetrating radar is that there are flumes. The thing is, the ocean used to be 400 feet lower. In the Ice Age, the ocean was 400 feet lower. And so about 90,000 years ago, we had sea level rise. And all of a sudden, all the rivers that were draining into the ocean through the Central Valley got silted up and covered. But there's all kinds of cobble and boulders and gravel that's in those ancient seabeds. And what they're discovering is that these underground flumes will allow for very rapid recharge of water from the... and so imagine the potential here. And this is what they're talking about with the San Joaquin Valley Blueprint. They're incorporating this into their plan. They're saying that we can take the water out of the Delta using the perforated pipes and the Delta channels, and we can move it in a central aqueduct to the areas where we've got these rapid recharge underground flumes, and we can put that water underground as fast as we can move it out of the Delta. And that's a tremendous opportunity, because we're talking about percolation basins that are being composed all over the Central Valley, which are very slow. I mean, that's one of our biggest challenges with managing flood water in the Central Valley, is it takes too long to get it into storage. So now I'm going to just tick through the other options. Treating urban wastewater, you guys know a lot about that. You set an example for the state, you set an example for the world. Need to do that in the rest of this state. We need to finish the job. Oh, okay. Look, this is from the Pacific Institute. This is only a year old. Look at that. There's only about 25% of it that's been tapped so far. That's a lot of water. Urban runoff harvesting is interesting, because this was also from the Pacific Institute, and I talked to one of the authors and I asked them, did you talk to a water engineer about this? They go, no, we didn't. What we did was we did a really, and they did a really good job of putting a grid over the whole state, over every urban area, and getting data, multi-year data going back decades on how much rain falls in each spot. They did that. They did really good work. That's valuable work. But it's hard to, when you've got 30 miles from the San Bernardino Mountains to the Long Beach Harbor, and you've got this giant channel and the water's, 10 inches of rain in 14 hours or whatever, and it's just surging down the channel. Okay, well, yeah, let's just reserve all that water because that's easy. No, it's not. And it has to be treated. So it's a challenge. How much could you really get? You guys tell me. How much urban runoff that we haven't been able to capture yet can we get? That's an honest answer. There's got to be some. There's places where we can get more. That we know that, but we don't know if we can get 500,000 or 1 million acre feet a year. That might be high. The Pacific Institute came out with this study, I should add, about 3 or 4 weeks before the final pivotal vote to approve or deny the Huntington Beach desalination plant. And the point of the entire study, which was highly publicized, was that we need to do this. We need to we need to process urban wastewater, and we need to process urban runoff. And that's the water that we should be taking off the table before we do desalination. I don't know if that was influential or not. Timing was very interesting. So let's talk about, here's another elephant in there. And there's two elephants in the room. One is the tunnels, and the other is desalination. I don't know which one gets the prize. I think the tunnels actually provoke more militancy, actually, than the desalination, which is saying a lot. I'm going to digress. I was told by some farming organizations representing farmers that if in the Water Infrastructure Funding Act we explicitly funded the Delta Tunnel, they couldn't support us. But if we explicitly did not fund the Delta Tunnel, they couldn't support us. I mean, that's a true story. And so they're bitterly divided over the Delta Tunnel. It's north of the Delta, boy, be careful. If you talk about say anything positive about the Delta Tunnel north of the Delta, be careful who you're talking with and make sure you have a quick getaway. Desalination is not quite that bad. I was reading the reports on what was wrong with the Huntington Beach desalination plant, and they said, well, it's going to have a negative impact on 450 acres of marine environment. 450 acres. It's not even a square mile. So let's compare it to, they're doing this all over the world. California should be setting an example of desalination at scale, because we can do it right. We can spend a little bit more maybe, or engineer it a little bit better, and create a standard for the world, because they're not going to stop. They're going to keep building it because they need water out there. In Israel, they're coming up on 1 million acre-feet a year of desalination, and they're dumping the brine into the eastern Mediterranean where there's no current. And I'll share the PowerPoint where I have the links to studies evaluating the impact of that. And the biggest negative marine impact was the turbidity caused by the release of the brine under pressure. That was the biggest negative environmental impact. Now, I'm not enough of an expert to say this with certainty, and I think it's important not to act like you're too sure about everything, because that's sort of what we're up against is, opposition to these plans, these projects. The people that oppose these projects really have all the answers, and of course, it's never that simple. The other thing to talk about with desalination is the cost. SOREC 2, which is about to be commissioned, they've been constructing it for the last few years, $1.5 billion. Huntington Beach was $1.4 billion. Now that does include some of the distribution, so maybe the apples to apples is 1.5 to 1, okay? But look at the difference in the production. 162,000 acre-feet a year versus 55,000 acre-feet a year, and most of that additional cost is litigation. And Poseidon spent $100 million in 20 years and got knocked out. And here I'm going to digress again. One of the people on the Water Commission who voted against the Huntington Beach proposal lives right next to Sylvester Stallone in Pacific Palisades and has a greenery, water-guzzling greenery, 2-acre estate with lawn and, sculpted hedges, the whole thing. That's kind of hypocritical. They could have really lowered the blended price of water, and they could have created water resilience. You've already done that, but you could have done it to a higher level, and you need to. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. So here we go, and I'm almost done. I don't know how much time I've taken because I'm looking forward to some questions. But here again, these last couple of slides, I really hope that some of the engineers that or if you're among us, get a hold of this PowerPoint and let's put together data like this for the whole state, because we're all in this together. They don't have water security in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay. They're dependent on the Hetch Hetchy Aqueduct. They're dependent on the State Water Project in the Silicon Valley. They're just as vulnerable to disruptions, prolonged droughts, as we are. I'm up there. You guys are probably the most resilient county in the state, in Orange County. This is another number I want to leave with you. We could probably do it all for 100 billion. Oh, 100 billion. Well, first of all, that's not a lot of money anymore. It's chump change. I mean, well, what are we doing? We're printing trillions of dollars. Just print another 100 billion. I mean, what's that? Why is that a big deal? But, if you look at this, look what you get for $100 billion. First of all, there's the Democratic argument. I don't want to sound partisan, but Democrats do understand something very well that Republicans don't, which is we're going to create a lot of jobs building this stuff. Well, we will. But what we'll also do is we will yield long-term benefits in the form of capital assets that are going to last 50 to 100 years and add 5 billion acre feet to our water supply. And I killed all my slides that just had writing on them, but I should probably talk about some of the stuff that was there. We're not secure with our water supply yet. We had a great year. Boy, it rained like heck, didn't it? It just rained and rained and rained. But the Colorado River, there's increasing demand on the Colorado River. We're not going to, certainly in the next few years, and it might be permanent, we're going to lose 1 or 2 acre feet there. We get 5 million acre feet a year from the Colorado River. But groundwater pumping, we pump 20 million acre feet a year out of the ground. And look what's happened. The farmers couldn't take as much water out of the river anymore because instead of raising the limit on catching bass who eat salmon right when they come out of the fishery, we decided that we would leave water in the river for the bass, for the salmon. I mean, think about that. So the farmers had to pump the water out of the ground in order to have their farms, and that caused the aquifers to collapse. And it talk a lot about what's happened to the farmers, but the groundwater pumping has to stop. It can't stop, but it has to be reduced significantly. So, there's another, 3, 4, 5 million acre feet a year that we're going to lose. So we're really, really lucky that we had a wet winter, right? We had an incredibly wet winter. If we'd had one more dry winter, and they're cutting back on the water that can be taken out of the rivers, and they're cutting back on the water, I think with good reason, that can be taken out of the ground, and we're losing water from the Colorado River. What was going to happen? Ask yourselves what was going to happen. In Oxnard, for example, where they're just tenuously connected to the State Water Project to begin with. What would have happened to these cities? We've got to get more water. And it's not just drought. What if there's a cyber attack on the Tehachapi pumps, and the software goes whoop, and it's a year because the piston blew out you've got other things. I mean, we have the most elaborate, complicated system of interbasin water transfers in the world. It's a complex system. What happens if something disrupts it? We need diversity of supply, and we need surplus. I could resist this one. Oh, no way, I'm going backwards, guys. Hold on. That one. It has numbers, so I get to keep it on screen. Look at desal and urban runoff. I just pulled those numbers out of the air. You can laugh. It's funny. I really wish that you guys will work with me to get these numbers are in the ballpark. These are not bad numbers. These are a really good start because this hasn't been done. Actually, I would desal, for example. If you use Carlsbad prices or Huntington Beach prices, desalination would actually, to get a million acre feet, would only cost 30. But what if there's a compromise? What if we could? Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll use underground collectors. Costs a lot more to do it that way. We'll do it. Let's put the dispersion pipes way out in the California current. We have one of the best currents in the world, so that it gets dispersed really easily. Let's spend more. We need the diverse sources of water. So I gave him an extra $10 billion. It's really easy to do hypothetically. Urban runoff, look, we know it's a problem. We know it's not something you can be glib about like the Pacific Institute was. We know that it's hard to get all that water when it comes down in a fast storm in Southern California. Well, that's 40 billion. Let's get another million acre feet there, and so forth. I still think the storm diversions from the Delta is extremely interesting. If I was managing a water agency in Southern California, I would contact those folks and ask them to explain what they're up to and what's next. And you know, the other thing about 100 billion, the California Water Plan in 1957, they committed not quite $2 billion, or excuse me, not quite $12 billion, and their budget, their state budget, the whole state budget was $2 billion, not quite $2 billion. They committed 6 times their state budget to the water project back then. 100 billion now is 1/3 of our state budget. It's 1/12 the commitment that they made. So that's the kind of priority that was attached to water in the old days, and kind of puts into perspective what we need to do now to bring it into the 21st century. All of an above strategy, creative solutions. I'm reading this one, sorry. Water investment will lower the cost of living. I could talk about that for a minute. I mean, we're all aware that this isn't just about water. It's about food and it's about housing. You can't build homes if you don't have water, if you can't guarantee the water supply. And it all ripples through the economy and everything costs more. And who's hurt the most by that? It's not the people living in Pacific Palisades next door to Sylvester Stallone. It's people that work, 2 jobs and have to choose between paying their utility bills and, having a steak once every blue moon. If you're really concerned about the climate, I'm not going to make any, I'm not here to talk about the climate. If you're concerned about it, you should want to make these investments more, not less. And as I just mentioned, it's social justice as well. Environmentalists might be against everything, but social justice warriors aren't. They want social justice. Affordability is social justice. And the energy and the cost shouldn't be the obstacles. I think this is my last slide or second to last slide. There's nothing in there. It's $21 billion. There's nothing for new water supply. They're going to fix the Friant-Kern Canal. That's good. They're going to fix some levees. That's really good. But there's nothing that's going to significantly increase the supply of water to California in anything that's currently proposed in the state legislature. And this is my last slide. We tried to do this in 2021, and a lot of people here were great help. And you can see what the provisions of it were. The problem was it included as eligible projects surface storage and desalination. And it included in the provisions a streamlining of the process for CEQA and the streamlining of the process for Coastal Act approval. And those 2 things were just, they just went crazy. Every environmentalist organization, I think 16 major environmentalist organizations right away came out against it. I don't think they read it because it would have funded a lot of the things that they care very much about. And it would have left the final decisions up to the California Water Commission. So they should have been behind it. Every major newspaper, with the exception, now a couple of exceptions, came out against it. But this is what we need. So I know that there's 186 billion heirs in California, 186 according to Forbes magazine. I think 3 or 4 of them are in the room. So write me a check. Let's do it. I guess that's somewhat unrealistic. Thank you very much.